Explainer, everyone. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating and honestly super chilling piece of modern Hindi folklore. We're looking at a story that takes the totally mundane, everyday routine of public transport and mixes it with absolute supernatural terror. To really appreciate this legend, you kind of have to understand the sheer massive scale of the Indian railway network. It's literally the lifeblood of the country, this bustling, gigantic web moving millions of people every single day. The stations, they're loud, they're chaotic, they are just bursting with life. But when night falls and those trains embark on these incredibly long, isolated stretches out between remote villages, the whole vibe changes. That bustling energy just fades into a really deep, echoing quiet. And that sets the stage perfectly for a modern myth to take root, the legend of the haunted night train. So let's dive right into this and explore how a simple late-night snack turns into a complete nightmare.
Imagine just sitting there in the dark and hearing this whisper to you, "Not money, it will cost something else." That iconic super sinister line is delivered by our story's main antagonist, the Chudale. Now, for anyone who might not be deeply familiar with South Asian folklore, a Chudale is basically a terrifying demonic witch. She's usually depicted as the vengeful spirit of a woman who was severely wronged in her past life. And a classic, totally horrifying telltale sign of a Chudale: her feet face completely backwards. Traditionally, these entities haunt lonely crossroads, or they attack isolated travelers in the dead of night. So when a Chudale utters this exact line to an unsuspecting train passenger, the dread is absolutely instant, because the currency she's trading in isn't cash, it's human lives.
Seriously, I want you to put yourself right in the middle of this scenario for a second. What would you actually do if you were trapped on an almost completely empty night train? Just picture it. You've got the rhythmic, monotonous clacking of the tracks right underneath you, those flickering, harsh overhead fluorescent lights, and the incredibly heavy isolation. You are entirely cut off from the outside world, no cell service, just endless, dark fields rushing by outside the window. It's basically the perfect, inescapable pressure cooker for a psychological horror story.
All right, let's get into Act 1, the haunted train journey.
This specific route heading to Rajgarh, it operates on this totally repetitive, deadly cycle. It is a literal ghost train. As night falls and the train finally departs the station, this heavy, completely unnatural silence just takes over the passenger cars, and the dread builds with every single passing mile. Then, right on cue, the Chudale arrives. But she's disguised as a common street food vendor, just walking down the aisle. By the time the train actually screeches to a halt at its final destination, someone has vanished without a single trace, and this horrifying loop just plays out night after night with devastating precision.
Let's look at how this trap springs on one of the early victims, a young woman named Gunjan. Gunjan is riding the mostly empty train when, out of nowhere, an old man starts shouting this frantic warning. He's screaming that the Rajgarh station is approaching and telling everyone to close their eyes tightly and pretend to sleep. And here is where Gunjan makes a totally fatal mistake. She just assumes, he's a crazy old man yelling at shadows. Suddenly, a woman in a long, dark veil appears, offering a plate of incredibly delicious-smelling bel puri. Now, bel puri is a massively popular Indian street food. It's this crunchy, tangy mix of puffed rice, sev, fresh chopped onions, and a perfectly spicy tamarind chutney. The aroma alone is just mouth-watering. So Gunjan's late-night hunger easily wins out, and the dramatic irony here is just off the charts. We know the old man is right, but Gunjan completely ignores him. She buys the snack, and the very moment she asks for the price, the vendor drops the veil, revealing her true, terrifying, demonic face. And before anyone can even react, Gunjan is dragged away into the pitch blackness.
Moving right along to Act 2, the Silent Protectors.
This narrative offers such a brilliant subversion of our expectations, because to the unsuspecting passengers who are just trying to get home, Pankaj and Ravika appear to be nothing more than a crazy old couple randomly shouting on a train and faking sleep. It's so easy to dismiss them, just like Gunjan did, but the reality is far more heroic. Pankaj and Ravika are actually a fiercely dedicated married couple from the nearby village of Ramgarh. They aren't crazy in the slightest. They are incredibly selfless protectors who intentionally ride this cursed, terrifying train every single night. They literally dedicate their own lives to being the thin line of defense between the Chudale and the travelers, even though their frantic warnings almost always fall on deaf, skeptical ears.
Which brings us to Act 3, the station master's denial. So, Pankaj finally realizes the devastating truth. Screaming at passengers just isn't working anymore. People are still dying. He figures out that the only way to stop the Chudale permanently is to literally halt the cursed train itself. No train, no passengers, no victims, right? So he takes this urgent plea to Raghu, the local station master. Now, Raghu happens to be the wealthiest guy in the village. He has significant political influence and really deep connections to higher-ups in the railway administration. He absolutely has the power to fix this, but his actions completely expose his underlying cowardice. When Pankaj passionately begs him to shut down the route because of this supernatural threat, Raghu flat-out refuses. Why? Because he's terrified, not of the ghost, but that if he files an official report about a local ghost story, his bosses in the city will laugh him out of his prestigious job. He actively chooses his own pride, his wealth, and his fragile reputation over the lives of innocent passengers. It leaves Pankaj completely dejected and utterly out of official options.
All right, things speed up here in Act 4, the counterplan. This is where we see exactly how everyday people combat seemingly invincible evils in folklore. It's not with magic, it's with deeply practical grassroots ingenuity. Since the authorities are totally ghosting them, Radhika takes matters into her own hands. She spends an entire day furiously cooking massive, bulk batches of her own highly delicious homemade pelpuri. As night falls, she and Pankaj board that doomed train lugging a giant bag of it. And before the midnight hour even strikes, before the Chudale can even arrive, Radhika actively walks the aisles, enthusiastically selling her safe, delicious snack to every single passenger for a mere 10 rupees. Her goal is absolute genius. If everyone on board is already full and completely satisfied, they simply won't buy food from the supernatural vendor. She is literally starving the monster by leaving the Chudale with 0 customers and 0 victims. It is a straight-up economic attack on a supernatural entity.
The tension inside those train cars reaches an absolute boiling point. Radhika successfully executes her brilliant strategy. She feeds almost every single person on board. The trap seems to be entirely neutralized. But then, the temperature drops. That eerie, bone-chilling voice echoes through the metal corridors. The veiled Chudale arrives. Pankaj instantly yells his warning, and he and Radhika squeeze their eyes shut to fake sleep. But this one passenger, a woman named Sheetal, remains completely oblivious to the mortal danger. The Chudale glides right over to her and starts this incredibly hypnotic sales pitch. Sheetal, despite having literally just eaten Radhika's food a few minutes prior, is dangerously, unnaturally tempted. Her eyes glaze over into this deep trance-like state. Slowly, almost as if she's being controlled by strings, she reaches her hand out to accept the cursed snack.
And now we hit Act 5, a shocking twist.
So, we have to ask ourselves, is this it? Will Radhika's incredibly brave plan actually work, or is the whole thing about the crash and burn? Sheetal's hand is inching closer and closer to the plate. The Chudale is just waiting, watching intently. This entire grassroots strategy, and literally the lives of everyone on board, hinges entirely on this single, agonizing, suspended moment in time.
In a blinding flash of pure selfless heroism, Radhika just completely breaks her cover. She leaps up from her seat, screaming at the top of her lungs for Sheetal to stop. But when the entranced Sheetal doesn't even flinch, Radhika makes the ultimate sacrifice. She lunges forward, physically intercepts the supernatural Bilpuri, and forces herself to eat it just to prevent Sheetal from being taken. The Chudale, who is absolutely gleeful to finally have claimed a victim, instantly snatches Radhika and her giant bag of food and drags her screaming out of the train car away into the pitch-black darkness outside. The sheer suddenness of it is jarring. We're just left watching Pankaj, this fiercely devoted husband, left entirely alone. He's weeping helplessly on the filthy floor of the train car as this heavy, utterly tragic silence descends on the surviving passengers.
The very next night, a grieving, entirely broken Pankaj actually returns to the empty train. He is determined to somehow carry on their protective mission completely alone. And sure enough, the familiar, terrifying voice calls out from the shadows. The veiled vendor glides down the aisle and approaches him. But instead of an attack, she reaches out and gently feeds him a single bite of Belpuri. Pankaj freezes. He recognizes the exact taste of those spices instantly. He looks up in shock, and the creature speaks in this eerie, deeply melancholic yet completely familiar voice. But now I have become a Chudale. It's Radhika. Here is what actually happened when the evil entity dragged Radhika into the dark. Radhika's pure, protective spirit ultimately proved to be way too strong to be consumed. She actively fought back, defeating the evil entity from the inside out. But in doing so, she underwent a transformation herself, literally taking the terrifying monster's place in the cursed loop. But here is the most important part. She retained every single ounce of her compassion and humanity. She is now the Belle Pori Chudail, but a completely benign one. She still rides that lonely night train, she still sells her snacks, but she doesn't hurt a single living soul. She became the exact monster she spent her life fighting, just so she could protect the passengers of that route forever. How wild is that?
It's an incredibly satisfying, full-circle narrative. It beautifully honors the sacrifice of its working-class heroes while still delivering a deeply spooky, unforgettable resolution. Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought for you to take away from this explainer today. Are you going to eat Pale Puri on a train next time? Because hey, if you ever find yourself on a lonely midnight route heading toward Rajgarh, you might want to think twice about exactly who is serving it to you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll catch you on the next deep dive.